Senator Henkel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable colleagues, Bill C-5 reflects a major commitment to revive the Canadian economy after years of underinvestment. As the Chamber of Sober Second Thought, the Senate has a unique opportunity to ensure that it creates value for the entire economy. I would like to thank and congratulate all the colleagues who have already taken part in the debate and who have helped us to shed light on the key issues raised by this bill. During the Committee of the Whole, legitimate concerns were raised about the environment, the ancestral rights of Indigenous peoples, and the scope of the concept of project of national interest. For my part, I'd like to raise a troubling paradox. We cannot claim to be revitalizing the economy without fully involving those who are the driving force behind it on a daily basis. I'm talking about our SMEs. Bill C-5 cannot ignore SMEs. It's an opportunity we cannot pass up.
Entrepreneur, I have come to understand deeply and personally the central role that small and medium-sized businesses play in our economy. It's one of the key reasons why I chose to serve in the Senate. I wish to be a voice for SMEs and to ensure they have a seat at the table when major economic decisions are made. The numbers speak for themselves. SMEs represent 98% of all businesses in Canada, account for 54% of total employment, and contribute nearly half of our GDP. Pourtant, elles sont...
Yet, they seem hopelessly invisible in calls for tender and government procurement contracts. According to figures published by Public Services and Procurement Canada, in 2008, the volume of federal contracts awarded to small and medium-sized businesses was 38%, 32% in 2022, 24% in 2023, and 20% in 2024. It should be noted, of course, that during this period, some SMEs may have been absorbed by larger companies or taken over internationally. However, the truth is, the number of SMEs has continued to grow, which makes these figures even more alarming. This decline is no accident. It's the result of systemic obstacles that have been identified for years. Several high-quality parliamentary reports, including those by the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, OGO, published in 2009 and 2018, highlighted certain major obstacles. Among those, the OGO Committee in the other place identified, firstly, the excessive complexity of procurement processes and the large volume of documents to be provided. What are we waiting for to simplify these procedures and finally adapt them to the realities of SMEs? Secondly, unequal access to information and the complexity of the language used. Why are tender documents not always identical, whether they're in French or English? And why is the vocabulary used so complex? Thirdly, the lack of human resources within SMEs to respond to calls for tender. How can they apply when the cost of participation is sometimes higher than the value of the contracts in question? Fourthly, the systematic priority given to the lowest price, to the detriment of quality or innovation. And finally, excessively long payment periods, which weigh heavily on companies' cash flow. These systemic obstacles affect all SMEs, but their effects are even more marked when it comes to underrepresented groups, such as women-owned businesses.
He is clearly aware of this issue. He has already set a target of 15% of women-owned businesses. While this goal was met in terms of contract volume from 2023 to 2024, No data has been released regarding the value of these contracts. It is crucial that women-owned businesses are not confined to low-values contracts, especially in high-value sectors.
Another systemic bias that is still holding back the development of women-owned SMEs in 2025 is access to finance. There are biased questions that a lender would never ask a man. I've experienced it, and I'm not the only one. Whereas a man is asked about the growth potential of his project or his business, a woman has to justify what she has already achieved and detail her expansion plans before hearing intrusive questions such as, how do you plan to reconcile family life and your entrepreneurial projects? Or, can someone else vouch for you? Female entrepreneurs are frequently asked whether they have ever applied for public contracts. Well, most of them say no. No, not because they lack the will or the skills, but because they have not yet been given the chance. In the end, excluded from the outset, they end up not applying again. Women in visible minorities are asked questions that often have nothing to do with the capacity and credibility of their company, and yet the same doubts persist. Are they really capable of delivering? Can they meet the specifications? Do we really think that an SME would invest the time and money to submit a bid if it didn't have the capacity to do so? This reasoning is totally obsolete in 2025. To all this is added the lack of access to networks of investors and the underrepresentation of women in decision-making committees. The result is glaring. According to the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub's 2024 report, women-owned businesses receive only 4% of venture capital funding in Canada.
That despite extensive effort to inform SMEs, the result is still falls short. We know that the Office of Small and Medium Enterprises, that the Business Development Bank of Canada, and numerous regional organizations have invested heavily in training sessions and informational events. Yet, accessing public procurement remains a daunting challenge for most SMEs. If the information is readily available and widely shared, then the issue isn't communication. It is the bidding process itself that needs a complete overhaul. Voici quelques exemples de
Here are a few examples of concrete levers capable of triggering true change, true positive change. I wanted to compare two government procurement platforms. On one hand, the American GSA Advantage platform, which centralizes information and enables federal agencies to identify and acquire products and services in a one-stop shop, like an online catalog. On the other hand, the Canadian platform, Canada Buys, launched in 2022, which simply publishes invitations to tender without offering any direct transactional function. The Canadian system imposes complex procedures and red tape. I therefore propose that the federal government impose an obligation on large companies and crown corporations that win public contracts to work with SMEs by setting, for example, quotas or reserving a minimum percentage of subcontracts for them. I also propose specific clauses with clear indicators to measure the real impact on SMEs. And why not? Tax or other incentives that could be introduced to actively encourage these partnerships. The government could also be inspired by positive examples, such as We Connect and Aéro Montréal, which are already strengthening supplier networks and supporting much more inclusive procurement. And finally, For positive change, calls for tender must evolve to place greater value on quality and innovation, going beyond the sole criterion of the lowest price. This openness would enable agile and creative SMEs to position themselves better and would also encourage solutions that are better adapted to the field and prevent contracts from always going to the same bidders.
Would be a perfect opportunity to turn federal procurement into a true engine of national prosperity. Public contracts represent 13 to 20% of Canada's GDP. Governments hold a powerful level to boost the economy nationwide without leaving anyone behind. We need a new mindset, one that connects economic performance with social responsibility. I call for an economy that wins without exclusion, one that grows without forgetting SMEs, one that prospers by supporting those who innovate every day, often behind the scenes. Il est grand temps de regarder.
It's high time we took a look behind the scenes of our economy and recognize the men and women who quietly keep it going. Because behind every SME, there is a face, a story, a willingness. We have a responsibility to reach out to them, to build prosperity that is both sustainable and shared. This challenge concerns us all. Let's use C-5 as a real springboard for our SMEs and our communities. Thank you for listening.